Keep it in front of you, Gwen.
Yes, I know. I was just going to say thanks to Kevin. I was just about to
Okay.
for stepping in there. Thank you.
I'd like to call the regular council meeting to order for July the 11th. We are honored to gather on the unceded traditional territory of the Comox First Nations. And the agenda, approval of the agenda, please.
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor? Carried. Minutes.
Move receipt.
Second.
Okay. And all in favor? Carried. And the Heritage Committee minutes, you want to do that separately?
Move receipt. Second.
All in favor?
Um,
Carried.
Can I just make one note on the Heritage Committee? Yes, it's going to have a statement of significance, but I guess I missed the point, or I forgot to convey it, that we need something to mark the spot, or else it's going to be lost again like the last 5 years. Because it doesn't say that in the motion. I should have crafted the motion, would have been better. But do I go back to the planning
Committee.
department, to the committee?
Yeah.
And make an amendment? Okay, thank you.
Okay, next, that council received the correspondence from Sue Lovelace, Cumberland Community School Society, CCSS, regarding Cumberland Food Share.
Move receipt. Second.
All in favor? Carried. And I will speak to this. One of the items that I had been contacted and told was that the food share program was having issues at the Weird Church, and so they were looking at other options and other facilities. So I took a tour with Thea, and we looked at a couple of different facilities in the village, and none of them were very good. So and the other option we looked at was putting a trailer on private property, and the person that owned the property was agreeable to it. But there couldn't be a connection for sewer, so that meant they couldn't have water. So it wouldn't work either. And putting them in a trailer, it would be smaller space than they're in now. So one of the options they had was to look at the room that they have and look at, they have right now 5 fridges in there and shelving and tables and everything. And they thought that if they condensed it, that it would provide more space for them, because now they're serving 143 individuals with food boxes on a bi-weekly basis. And it is a tremendous amount of food that they're collecting. So they've put together a request to buy items, and a commercial refrigerator, upright freezer, chest freezer, shelf unit on wheels, food bins, food, and the final was to take the money up to $10,000. So they were requesting the other $2,056 because they have fundraised $47,000 to continue the food share program till December 22nd. So they were asking if we would cover that cost in there. And so this is what's been presented to you. If there's any questions from anyone, I would certainly try and answer them. If not, we can find out later from them.
Yeah, just to clarify, so the space at Weird Church is too small, and that's the issue with it, because the program has increased so much?
Yes, it's increased it so much, but they can adjust with condensing the furniture and make it more accessible. There's a group of 5 and 6 women that go every second Friday to pack the boxes, and it will make the circle much easier to do. There's still a little bit of an issue with transporting it up to the roadway, but they can work with that to carry the boxes. Because I don't think that they don't want to move into somewhere and be there for 6 months and then have to leave again.
Right.
And they have, the church, Weird Church, has been very kind and has donated that area to them free of charge. And there's not many places in town that will accept them without rent.
Makes sense. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Brown?
Yeah, thank you so much for working with Sue and Thea and the CCS gang to bring this forward. I'm super happy to support, although I do want us to be thinking about how we can support this organization and program, the specific program moving forward, because we have given them a lot of the funding has come through the COVID restart. Thank you. But that's going to be gone. And so I think it's a valuable service, and we would, I'd like to find a way to support it over the long term.
Actually, I was going to add, I'm having another discussion with Sue about funding in looking at somewhere else too. Okay?
Thank you.
So we can accept a motion?
That council approve the expenditure of $10,000 to be funded by the COVID-19 Restart Funds for a contribution to the Cumberland Community Schools Society food program, and that council direct staff to bring forward an amendment to the adopted 2022 to 2026 financial plan bylaw to reflect this expenditure.
Seconder?
Second.
All in favor? Carried. I think they'll be extremely happy. Next, we have that council receive the streamlining accessory dwelling unit approval process, and that the consultant will be making a presentation.
Move receipt.
Second.
All in favor? Carried.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'll make a brief introduction to the report and to Nancy's presentation. So I'm excited to be here before you tonight to present the first implementation step in our development approvals process modernization project. Working with Nancy Henderson and her team at Urban Systems, we presented a report at the end of May that outlined numerous recommendations to streamline our development approvals for the project as a whole. Over the next several months, we'll be bringing a number of these recommendations to Council for direction and decision. We believe that streamlining the ADU, accessory dwelling unit process, is a relatively straightforward action that will have a significant impact on staff time, a significant positive impact. As such, we're bringing this action forward first. The recommendations in the report are to refer the report to the Advisory Planning Commission and the Homelessness and Affordable Housing Committee, and to draft bylaw amendments. So the idea is that the next staff report would include committee referral responses as well as draft bylaws, and that input from the committees will assist us in the details for these bylaw amendments. So I'll now turn it over to Nancy to describe the changes to the ADU approvals we are recommending.
Thanks, Courtney. And if it's okay with you guys, I will share my screen so that we can see the presentation. Alrighty. Okay, so thank you very much for having me, and I'll go through a presentation for you that just sort of summarizes some of the rationale for this action, as well as some of the potential increased zoning regulations that we could consider. I certainly appreciate any feedback that Council has to sort of guide this process as we embark on it. So in terms of the presentation, just wanted to sort of review some of the recommendations to streamline the ADU, what the benefits will be, and some of the challenges or risks, and we'll review the recommended best practices across the province, as well as outline the potential OCP amendments and propose additional zoning regulations to make up for the change in if Council was supportive of removing the DP requirement. And then we'll outline the next steps and where we go from here to move this through quite quickly if Council is interested to do that, because it certainly was something we saw as low-hanging fruit, so to speak, to provide sort of a quick win for the department to free up some additional resources. In terms of the context, as you know, Cumberland updated your OCP and then zoning bylaw to allow for ADUs. Since that time, you know, the Cumberland's been very successful, actually, compared to other municipalities in terms of sort of like per capita uptake of ADUs, with over 55, I believe, that have been approved, which is pretty significant for a community of your size. And it was really focused in on the R1A zone, and and focusing on some infill development close to downtown. And as you'll see in the presentation, there are other zones within the community that do allow ADUs as well. Within the zoning bylaw, there is the provision that was based on the BC Building Code of a 90 square meter maximum. And that's something that we're not proposing touching at this point in time as we transition potentially away from DPs, but some other communities are actually increasing and looking at different sizes of ADUs as well, and quite often increasing them as lots increase in size. And it was never intention that recreational vehicles would fit the definition of an ADU. And as mentioned, the OCP contains a lot of growth management strategy and really prioritizes the efficient use of land and infill housing. And it does identify ADUs as being a significant measure to achieve the goals of the OCP, and also supporting rental households within the village. Some of the challenges with the DP approach is that it has been taking quite a bit of staff resources dedicated to approving those DPs as well as associated variances. It is helpful. Development permits, are attractive to local government because of the increased ability to basically govern form and character, but it does really add a lot of time to the approval process, and I would say that is a best practice to move away from the development permit approach, and many municipalities have transitioned into building permit approval and zoning regulations. The DP process does result in increased costs to the applicant from the DP fee, as well as the stormwater management plan and landscape plans. While there is landscaping requirements proposed, they don't necessarily have to be provided by a landscape architect. So they might be just a little simpler and less costly to the applicant. The other thing that's great about this particular point in time to make these changes is the village was successful in receiving UBCM funding. So this would be something that the grant could fund in terms of the transition and changes in the OCP amendment and also the zoning regulation. So that's a really nice point about doing it together with this modernization project. And it was, as identified by Courtney, a recommendation in the report that was presented to you on May 30th. Some of the best practices regarding ADUs has been recently summarized in a report that BC Housing put out just last year. Cumberland was actually featured in there as a sort of a case study, which was neat. But as you can see that many of the municipalities are looking to streamline and have easy evaluation and permitting processes. Many have already implemented that streamlining, and also reducing costs for registration, I'd say fees and permitting as well. And also producing guidebooks just to make it easier for homeowners to understand what entails in the application process, and something that has been recommended in the modernization summary report, and also part of the next steps of this process. This slide outlines the current ADU zoning regulations. So you'll see that ADUs are permitted in a number of zones, but DPs are only required in the R1A and R4. I think it's important to note out that several ADUs have been constructed in the R3 zone without any community complaints to my knowledge. So you have had success putting ADUs in the ground without a development permit in the village already. Some of the existing general regulations in the zoning bylaw are that ADUs shall not be located in a front yard. They must be fully attached. The floor area limitation at 90 square meters and 75% of the gross floor area. So making sure that it's really subordinate to that principal dwelling, even though some of the principal dwellings in Cumberland are small. So that would even further limit the size of the ADU. And then the height is limited based on 1 or 2 stories to a maximum of 7.5 meters, and also requiring clearance of 1.5 meter for firefighting purposes. And while these are regulations that the village may wish to consider at a later point of time, they're suggesting that we just stay consistent while we're transitioning away from development permits if council does support that. In terms of potential amendments to the OCP, in order to remove the DP requirement, there'd be more amendments required than this, but this is just sort of an example of the list of justification within the DPA 6. There's also the Carlisle Lane DPA 10, which requires DPs for ADUs as well. But this line here would be amended, and then there'd be some other regulations within the development permit area that would also require to be deleted because they're specific to ADUs. And then these are the guides generally within the DP areas. They cover landscaping, parking, access, amenity areas, decks and balconies, urban design, addressing, and privacy. And most of those we could actually translate into zoning bylaw regulations, except for when we're getting into that urban design, informative character, materials, and so on. That's where the zoning bylaw, unfortunately, is unable to do that. So what we've done here is we've translated, not all, and there's an attachment to your council report that has a few more examples, but we've shown the regulation that's currently within the DP. And then we're proposing zoning regulations so that the village doesn't just have to like totally give up on some of the requirements that I think have been quite important to since implementing ADUs in the village. And one of those is landscaping. And so we've suggested some additional landscaping requirements that also would increase the screening of ADUs, which might be give council some comfort if you're reducing some of the form and character urban design elements. So we're suggesting that screening is important. However, if someone does have a really large lot and the carriage house can be located far away from adjacent property lines, that there'd be maybe a provision where you would require that screening because it would basically meet a setback of a principal dwelling. That's one of these are all suggestions at this stage, and certainly looking for council's feedback if there's any concerns. And we're also suggesting, outdoor amenity areas and things like that being maintained. Access, the existing requirement is for 1.2 meters, and we're been in our discussions with staff, we've had a workshop with staff as well, and it was suggested that be increased to 1.5 meters just to match existing requirements by emergency services, so it will be more aligned with that. The parking areas are already included in the zoning bylaw, and some of the provisions in the DP guidelines are it's not necessarily something that can only be governed by the DP. So I think the villages already can take care of, unlicensed vehicles and commercial vehicles, for example. The amenity areas, we feel we can directly translate into the zoning bylaw. So those would be exactly the same as they are in the DP. And then decks and balconies, this is one where it's got like minimized impacts. We're suggesting that accessory dwelling units must not include any balconies facing the rear side yard, above ground patios or rooftop deck. So it'd be basically ground orientated patios, and then you would have screening around that. So we're looking and considering privacy of the adjacent property owners. Urban design. So we talk a lot about visual interest and blank walls. And when you get into materials, these types of things are much harder to govern through zoning, in that it's not permitted, and DPs would be the place where you can really focus on that form and character. So that would be something that the village would be giving up with some respect. But what we're recommending is that brochure and guide be developed so that it would be really encouraging what the village would like to see. So try to encourage people through precedent imagery and basically spelling out what's encouraged and what's not encouraged in a guide. And then that would become part of the website material and application information that would be provided to applicants. And then we still would have I think, enhanced screening regulations as well that would provide privacy and screening. So this is one area that I believe has come up in the village where there's been some concern about sort of overlooking from carriage houses on hillsides, peeking up over the principal dwelling. And so one of the discussion points when we had with staff is this is a proposed zoning provision that we have seen in other communities, but basically having uphill sloping lots that are, fairly steep, that no portion of the ADU should be higher than the peak of the roof of the principal detached dwelling. So if there are parcels up above, viewscapes and things like that are considered, as well as the view from the street as well. So that's something that's proposed for consideration as well. And then in terms of the other urban design elements that are outlined in the attachment to your report, those really, to me, seem to be geared towards more medium density type developments. And I didn't go into the details here, but I think what we've kind of covered off is sort of how we could try to replicate some of the DP provisions into zoning regulations. Some of the other ones are the garage is, we're not recommending that they don't protrude beyond the front entrance of the unit because there is a concern about garages being too visually prominent. Unfortunately, vinyl siding is not something that you can regulate through zoning regulations. However, through the guide, we could certainly not encourage it and state that. Addressing is already taken care of, so it's redundant in the DP guidelines. And then again, the large windows should not face directly onto adjacent properties. Those are the types of things that zoning bylaws unfortunately are unable to regulate. However, we've got the screening requirements, which it can, and then the brochure to discuss privacy and also a variety of building design. So definitely what this is my concluding slide, just kind of where we would go from here. And after that, I'd love to hear council's thoughts if there's any concerns about what you've heard so far. In terms of our next steps, we have been scheduled for the Advisory Planning Commission should council support referring this to them, as well as the Homelessness and Affordable Housing Committee. From there, and with those comments, the plan would be to draft the amending bylaws. We would want to just make sure that we're being very transparent and prepare a news release and web material to encourage public review, and then present the bylaws to council for first and second reading and schedule a public hearing. There would be the opportunity for the public to come out and provide any insight at the public hearing, and then third reading and adoption, or potentially amending bylaws based on what we've heard. And then in simultation with this, we'd also want to be amending internal processes and preparing brochures and guides and checklists and application information and amending forms, just so that on adoption, the village is ready to process the applications as amended with the support of council. So that concludes my presentation, and be really happy to answer any questions that council may have.
Councillor Kettler, do you have questions?
Yeah. So the chart of the zoning regulation possible changes. What's written in the far right-hand column is what we would potentially be putting into the new bylaw around it, because some of them, for example, I'm a little concerned about the accessibility one, and we should probably be referring this to the accessibility committee as well. But yeah, under the accessibility, right now we have accessible features shall be integrated into the overall design concept and identified on the site plans. But then in the new column, it says requirements of the BC Building Code will continue to apply. So is that there is incorporation of those features, or there isn't? I'm not totally clear on that. are we just adding to what is in the first column that we already have in the zoning bylaw with that second column?
I could make a comment on that. I'm looking at ADUs that have been approved. It seems that if an ADU, if there's an inability to provide, to meet all of the guidelines in the development permit area, such as, all entrances to the ADU must be accessible. If it's just not possible due to the grade on the property, I've noticed that these ADUs have still been approved. So for example, like an accessible pathway, like no stairs, would be something that's encouraged in the DP guidelines. But I've noticed looking at past approvals that that's not always provided in the ADU. So it seems that the accessibility requirements are more, they've been implemented over the years, more of as a way of encouragement. The things that are outside of the BC building code, right? So things that are like happening in the yard outside of the property. And that would be the main one, is an accessible pathway. So I think that there are many lots in the zones where ADUs are allowed that are quite flat, that are going to be able to easily have accessible pathways. And for the odd one that isn't, it seems that these ADUs have been approved over the years anyway. So that's the kind of information that we took into account when looking to address it this way, that so much can be addressed through the BC building code.
Okay, and so the accessible travel routes being hard slip-resistant surfaces with the minimum width, that's all staying in there? No?
I believe so, yeah. That's right.
Okay. And then the next one down, the building form and character. You touched on it a bit, that we can't continue to have the same requirements. The use of smooth surface, wood, concrete, board, acrylic, stucco, brick, baked, enamel, finished metal siding or metal panels are encouraged. Is that not the same for ADUs in this proposal, or is it different?
Through the chair, if Courtney, if you'd like me to respond. Yeah, so basically, when you transition from development permit into zoning bylaw regulations, you don't have the ability to be regulating materials in the same way. So it would be through the brochures and guidelines that you could still be encouraging the use of those materials, but it would not be possible to, say, limit vinyl siding in the zoning bylaw. But the goal would be to encourage, through precedent imagery and guidelines, the community to do that.
Okay, because I certainly agree with streamlining and handing this approval process over to staff, but with pretty strict guidelines, like I wouldn't necessarily want to leave that all open, and just a suggestion through a brochure. Yeah, those are just my thoughts. Thanks.
Councillor Brown?
Yeah, thank you for this. I really appreciate the amount of work that goes into ADUs and how many of them are coming through planning. But I have a few concerns. One is has been outlined by Councillor Kettler. So I know we can't require anything beyond the building code for accessibility, but by having a DP, we are getting closer to that. Then same with form and character. So that's challenging me. But I think we can work through those things. I'm not sure I fully understand what the guidelines would do, except give people guidelines which they could take or leave. But creating that culture around them, which is sort of established already, so okay. But my major concern is that if we are streamlining approvals for ADUs that are vacation rentals, that is a commercial operation and a business, and I don't think we should be putting them in front of what could be something else. I just don't want to favor commercial businesses in that way over other residential development. And so we would, and I'm not sure whether through this process we can require that if they go through this process, it's a long-term rental, or like what's our tool there?
Through the chair, I mean, that would be something I'd have to give further thought to. I mean, I guess certainly, if it was, through your processing matrix in terms of if it's a priority, I guess those could be questions, and maybe there'd be some limitation that if they tick the box saying, because someone could say, no, it's going to be for long-term rentals and then change their mind in 6 months potentially, but maybe there'd be some way that, you couldn't, if you went through that sort of fast track, you couldn't use it for a short-term rental for a period of time. That would be something that would require some additional thought.
Okay, yeah, and so while you're talking, I'm thinking, is it possible that you build the ADU, you think it's going to be long-term rental, you have a bad experience or whatever, you change your mind, you want to turn it into a vacation rental, there's some other mechanism that captures that lift, and that goes into an affordable housing fund or some other mechanism like that. I'm just trying to, I don't think it's appropriate for us to fast track ADUs that are not, our strategic priority is affordable housing, but one of the main ones, and we just learned in Committee of the Whole that we really, without the province's help, don't have many opportunities to create affordable housing, and here we are fast tracking things that may or may not be contributing to housing stock that is relatively affordable. That's my concern.
I mean, that's a very tough question through the chair. And I mean, in terms of, you do allow ADUs to be STR, so it would be very hard to separate those. It may be in time, the village may not wish to do that, but as of right now, it could be used for other purpose.
Okay, and then the other thing I noted was lighting along the pathway. So in some cases, we've seen a pathway that goes from the front of the lot all the way back to the back of the lot. When you talk about a lit path, that seems to be counter to our night sky wishes, and so how can we work around that lighting so it's not overdone, I guess?
Through the chair, would it be possible to incorporate some lighting limitations if based on your night sky policy as we further develop these guidelines?
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Kettler, just before, yes.
Yeah, just quickly, because it's also on lighting that under lighting, you're saying most of the guidelines are better suited for multifamily buildings where an entire site is being developed. But a simple thing like in their security and other lighting be placed so as to not shine directly into residential properties. If that's not part of what we're putting forward, I could see there being issues with lighting. We've had that in the past where neighbors have security lighting that's causing problems for their adjacent neighbors. So yeah, I just see that there being problems arising if we're not being specific enough with these guidelines.
Okay. We're patient. Go ahead, Councillor Brown.
Sorry. I have a lot of notes on this. So the other thing I just wanted to mention is I'm okay with ADUs in the front yard. The rest of council may not be, but I think that's okay. In some cases, there's a giant front yard that's just a lawn, and I feel like it's okay to put a house on there. But maintaining the lot coverage at 40%, is that carrying through?
There is no proposed change to lot coverage regulations at this time.
Councillor Sproul?
Yeah, well, my concerns with ADUs have always been potential loss of privacy. We have seen some instances, in the last 2 or 3 years, and the lighting issue. None of these would be an issue if the lots were big enough to have the ADUs as far, at opposite corners of the lot, rather than close up to the neighbor's yard. And I guess it's all written up what they can do, but is there anybody checking to see if the grade of the land, because the land, one particular site I'm thinking of, was a gentle slope from the road up. This was a Camp Road house. And then it went like just a wall of dirt, actually. I wouldn't have considered it developable. But I guess the planning department goes and measures the angles. I don't know how we deal with that.
Do you have an answer, or are you asking?
I just didn't think that they would be measuring the angles of the slope, but I was just wondering for reassurance from the planning department.
In terms of through the chair, in terms of implementation of these regulations, one of the steps will be working with the building inspectors as well to make sure that they're all aware of the regulations. I mean, lot grading and slope is something that would be considered at time of building permit. You're looking at driveway grades, and there should be a flag when you're seeing slopes that are in the 20% range. So that would be the expectation that there would be. And staff would be aware of all of these regulations. So on those steeper slope lots, there would be the additional provision that's proposed if that was how the bylaw was drafted.
Thank you.
Okay. My question is, if a person wants an ADU and it's they need a variance, will they still be able to apply for a variance? And if they do, will they follow the rules that are here now?
Your worship, yes, the variance, if they do not meet all the provisions in the zoning bylaw, they would either have to amend their plans or apply for a variance.
And all the regulations that we have, form and character and all that, will be these ones or new ones?
The ones that are proposed, so for example, generally if there's a variance, it would be varying a zoning bylaw provision because you wouldn't, you're bound to the development permit guidelines, so you shouldn't really be varying those, but they would have been varying a zoning bylaw provision in the past. And now you could potentially have many more zoning bylaw provisions that could potentially be varied as well. And a variance at this stage would be required if they didn't conform.
And then they would pay the fees also?
Yes, the fees, unless council was to not require them, would be paid, and as per the fee bylaw.
Okay. Well, that would be something that we would hope if they follow the rules, they don't have to pay. Once they want to go against the rules, then they have to pay for a variance. I would think that's the way it should be, or there's no incentive. Okay. Anyone else have any questions? Okay. Someone like to move the motion?
I'll move that council refer the streamlining accessory dwelling unit approval process report to the Advisory Planning Commission, the Homelessness and Affordable Housing Committee, and I was going to add the Accessibility Committee.
Okay. Seconder?
Second.
All in favor? Carried.
And that council direct staff to draft bylaws to amend the development approval procedure to streamline the approval process for accessory dwelling units.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
Thanks.
that council receive the proposed changes to Recreation Financial Assistance Program report.
Move receipt.
Second.
All in favor? Carried. Welcome, Ryan.
Hi, thank you. Good to be here. Talking about some proposed changes to our financial assistance and recreation programs. Just as a general overview of where we're at now, the current situation. So we've currently got our financial assistance and recreation program, or FAIR. That's a Village of Cumberland program that provides qualifying adults with 50 free admissions or a half-price membership. We're also in our first year of the LEAP program, which is a program we're doing in conjunction with Courtney, Comox, and the CVRD, and that's Leisure for Everyone accessibility program. And what that does is it provides Comox Valley youth who are under the age of 19 with 52 free visits to each of the different recreation centers, Courtney, Comox, Cumberland. So that was implemented as a pilot project earlier this year, well, at the start of this year. And what we're talking about, or what we're proposing now, is expanding that program to people of all ages. Expanding LEAP to residents of all ages. Since submitting this report, Comox, Courtney, and the CVRD have all approved this with their councils. In the case of Comox and Courtney, they've approved it as a one-year trial. CVRD just has it indefinitely. So that's the one proposed change. The other side of it is basically making some changes to our own Village of Cumberland Fair program. And the first proposed change would be eliminating the option of 50 free admissions, because if we are to expand LEAP to all ages, then that becomes redundant. But the second change would be adding a program subsidy whereby qualifying residents would get a $350 credit per year that they could use toward half-price recreation programs. So these would be things like summer camps, after-school programs, fitness classes. Currently with the drop-in, with like the LEAP or the FAIR, the drop-in admissions that they get, they can only access things like the fitness studio and drop-in programs, pickleball, table tennis, for example, that kind of thing. So it'd expand that. It would bring us a bit more in line with the other local municipalities. Currently, we're the only municipality in the valley that doesn't have a program component to our low-income program. And it's something that's come to the forefront lately, specifically in the context of Ukrainian refugees who have relocated to the valley, or relocated to Cumberland specifically, and we've had calls from families who are supporting them and asking about summer camps and that kind of thing. Implications-wise, financial implications with a program like this are hard to nail down, just because we are trying to reach families and residents who might not have access to these programs otherwise. Thus far, uptake in the LEAP and FAIR programs, at least here in the village, has been quite modest. We've only had 14 people who have redeemed passes. We do get applications from the other municipalities, people who have applied for LEAP there. So we've got their applications ready to redeem the passes. But a lot of them, they're interested in Courtney or the CVRD and they're not redeeming. Obviously increasing the program to people of all ages would increase the participation. But in any case, we estimate that the overall financial implication is going to be modest and ultimately sustainable. And then operationally, we don't have any major concerns about this. So I'll leave it there for now. If you have any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them.
Councillor Brown?
Thanks. This is great. So I didn't realize, I thought it was 52 visits, not 52 visits to each facility. So that's awesome. If someone in Cumberland wanted to access a program at Courtney Rec for their kid, do they have an option for a subsidy there? Or does this cover that? Or is this only for our programs and then they'd access the Courtney?
The program component that we're proposing would only be for Cumberland.
Okay.
I believe, so the CVRD is part of their LEAP program. They have a program component. So the example was a Cumberland resident wanting to access in Courtney. They'd be able to access a program subsidy for CVRD programs. As far as I know, the Comox and Courtney program subsidies would only be available to local residents in that municipality.
Okay.
And that would be
Thank-
the same for ours.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Sproul?
No, I have no concerns. I think all of them sound really fair and supportable.
No pun
That's good.
intended.
I think it's great that people are encouraged to move around, to try out the different programs, because one of them is very likely to stick. So it's a good way to get introduced to multiple sports. Thanks.
Councillor Kettler?
Thank you. Yeah, very happy to see this coming forward, and thank you for adjusting Cumberland's policy to help fit the regional initiative. You know, when it was put forward, it was really the idea would be that it would apply to all ages, and so, but we just started off with kids to sort of see how it would work with each of the municipalities, and that we wanted to make things as low barrier as possible, and so that each municipality and the regional district had their own low income program, and then families would have to apply at each place. And so having that sort of one application where you can go to any of these recreation facilities was really the main drive behind that, to make it really accessible and easy for low-income families. So yeah, I'm very happy to see this come forward, and happy to also support the program initiative and supplementing the programs, because I know that it is, the drop-in is great for families, but what a lot of the kids need is entry into some of those programs, week-long programs for the summer and that kind of thing. So it's great to be able to support those families with Cumberland's own initiative toward programming. I was just wondering from staff, though, where those funds will be coming from if we do support that.
It's, again, it's sort of a funny thing, because the funds are only sort of coming from somewhere else if the person, the child, adult, whoever it is, would have participated in the program otherwise. Really what we hope to do is reach people who don't have the financial means to participate and are being left out. So it's money that we don't have, that we wouldn't have otherwise. The other case where it could come into effect is obviously if we've got a summer camp that can only have 16 people, and one of those, it would have filled up otherwise, and one of them is being taken by somebody. We think that there's going to be enough instances where both of those situations aren't going to coincide, that asking sort of where the money is coming from is, I guess, less of a concern. Not to sound flippant, but just for lack of better words, I guess.
Yeah, if I can just jump in, there's been a little bit of financial analysis done, but like Ryan says, it's really hard to understand exactly what the impacts. We think that it can be absorbed with the operating budgets as is right now, which recently in recreation, even with COVID, have been fairly close to hitting what we would expect. And so with increased participation, increased growth in recreation, we think that that's just absorbing it operationally should still be sustainable. But I think the report mentions that this would be monitored, and if there needs to be adjustments, then that would come back at a later date to council for your awareness and potential change.
Great.
That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah. Thank you.
I just want to thank you very much for bringing this forward. It's something that we should have done a while ago, but thank you for bringing it forward. I know I've talked to the seniors over there, and they're enjoying their ability over there, and a lot of them could not participate if it wasn't for the assistance they're getting. So thank you for bringing this forward. What is your pleasure, Council?
So I'll move that council support the expansion of the regional Leisure for Everyone accessibility program to residents of all ages, and make it a permanent program beginning January 1st, 2023. And further, that council amend the village's financial assistance and recreation program to replace the current admissions and or membership benefit with a 50% discount on programs up to $350 per year, retroactive to July 1st, 2022.
Seconder?
Second.
All in favor? Carried.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, that council receive the Regional Tourism Service Agreement Update Report.
Move receipt. Second.
All in favor? Carried.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Nice to be in front of you again. We have an update report in front of you regarding our regional tourism contract. And you can see through the recommendations that we're actually going to talk about two things through the tourism report, and that's the contract for regional tourism services for 2022, and then a recent request for consent to a bylaw update on behalf of the CVRD that would see Cumberland become a member of the service in 2023. So first off, we brought you the tourism agreement between the CVRD and Cumberland in February 14th. And at that time, you provided us consent to move forward into the agreement. And so we got a revision of that report later that spring, and we've identified a change in it that we thought best to bring back to council. You can see through our report sort of on the background of how this all came about. When TVI took over the regional destination and marketing tourism services on behalf of the CVRD last year, one of the first things they did was reach out to our community to see how we could be involved in that destination organization, marketing organization. Since then, I think I've been very consistent to say how great Tourism Vancouver Island has been in our community. You might have noticed them here again this Sunday with their mobile information booth, and the connections they've made with our business community has been really good. So as I said within the report, staff are still quite in favor of it. It's 2022. This is services that are almost rendered at this point. But just to make sure that for transparency that we understand all the pieces of the agreement, the change that we recognized was in the list of eligible expenses. And it was an inclusion for mortgage payment. And so that kind of spurred us to ask for more information on behalf of the CVRD about what that inclusion was. And so you can see, maybe I should apologize for the size of the attachments to this report, but this represents a lot of information we didn't have at the time. And notably, there is in the financials planning document for the CVRD for the Service 550. And recognizing, of course, that it's now just a destination marketing tourism thing. And the mortgage is defined as a short-term demand loan with the Municipal Financing Authority to be repaid by 2026, and this is on the Tourism Information Center. The annual cost is about $76,000, and so just acknowledging that this year with our contract, it was estimated between $7,000 and $13,000. Our contract for this year will be $12,900, and payment for it has already been allocated by council from our restart funding. And so there is no increase in the cost to the contract, just a bit more clarity on those eligible expenses and how and what that contract goes towards. Other than that change, there's nothing else to report in that agreement. Just making sure that the CVRD made that change and wanted to make sure that we were aware of it. The second half pertains to a letter we got on Monday. About the update to the Bylaw 725 on the CVRD, which is one of the recommendations of the process that came out of the service review they went under the last year. So like we did in 2016, Comox, the town of Comox requested a service review. And through that service review, as part of the changes to the bylaw and changes to the service, a recommendation was made that Cumberland should be invited back into it. So the letter that we got last Monday was an acknowledgement that this had been brought to the board and the recommendation had made through the first three readings. And so we got a letter of request for consent from the CVRD to provide our consent to the bylaw to consider joining the service again. So as you can see through our recommendations, they've asked for a response by August 15th. And our recommendation to council is to ask to have that extended to September 30th. In order to give staff some time to collect more information, to get a better understanding. What it's going to boil down to in 2023 is council have an option. If they're happy with their service and continue to be in the service, looking for a contract arrangement like we are now, or looking at being a member of that service. And so staff will have the opportunity to go back and look at both of those options and bring information to help you make that decision. Likewise, one of our recommendations is to request the CVRD to come and present on the service. And give us a good idea of exactly what being a member is. And we won't get into it now, but there is certain benefits between contract and membership and certain disadvantages. And our goal is just to make sure that council has all the information they need in order to make that decision. So,
Okay. Councillor
any
Brown.
questions?
Sorry, Councillor Spruill.
Ah.
You were first last time.
Questions. Of course, it's hard to jump in and say yes immediately because we had issues in the past that that particular service or one like it didn't really fit our needs. And from what I've read from your report, it sounds like they're a very good organization, Vancouver Island Tourism, and seem to be bending over backwards to make it not applicable, but amenable to the village of Cumberland. So I'm looking forward to hearing more.
Thank you, guys. One of the advantages of this process is that we've got to experience this service provider for a year. And so that really helps with our decision as well, our recommendation on behalf of staff as well.
Okay. Now, Councillor Brown.
Thank you. Thanks, Killen. Yeah, happy with the service so far, with the caveat that I'm not seeing I'm not seeing conservation interests. So let me back up. So I think the majority of the conversation that we've had as a regional governing body at whatever meeting that was very much about mitigating the impacts of tourism. I believe that Tourism Vancouver Island is very much aligned with that. I'm not sure Destination BC is aligned with that. So there's a bit of a rub there. And I've consistently asked about representation on the TAC, and I know they just want businesses there, but that means there's no conservation mindset at that table. And so where is that conservation mindset? And I'm not sure that it is there. And so I would like them to speak to that when they come back to us. Is that up to the admin group to articulate that, or what's that going to look like? And then I also see that the MRDT is in the scope of work for TVI, but it's not in the agreements. And so we'd want to know what that's going to look like, specifically because it mentions that leveraging the MRDT funds for marketing is a use, and we all know that that's not what we need. So to make sure that we are allocating MRDT to other things, including the possibility of affordable housing. So that's my concerns, and I look forward to them coming back because I think TVI is doing a great job and we should join the service.
So you're leading me down the road I said we didn't have to talk about now, but this is a big discussion for me, is the benefits of being a contract member of a service and being a member of a service. And so right now, as a contract member of the service, we don't have a lot of say other than being consistent in how that service is delivered. And as a member, we'll have a bigger voice, and we could probably get, same with the TAC processes, right? We can be involved a bit more in the nuts and bolts of the service. But as a contract member, we're kind of accepting the service that they have. Saying that, I know at TVI, and they've been very forward, if there's organizations like UROC or the Forest Society that have information that they want to share through Tourism Vancouver Island, they'd be very receptive to doing that on their behalf. And so there are connections that can be made, but I think this is something to look at for 2023, is our role within that service and what's important to us as far as the ins and outs of how we access it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Go ahead. Councillor Ketchler, sorry.
Thanks. Where to start? So it's been a long road for me, starting from being the point person on negotiating our way out of the service back in my first term to negotiating on the other side with Comox on their exiting of the service. So it's been a very interesting experience for me. Yeah, I just wanted to talk. I mean, TVI has been really great, and I think that for the most part, they really do understand what we want out of our tourism service. and I think they can leverage a lot of funds, and a lot of that is destination marketing. But I think that they can figure out a way that they can do it where they are redirecting people at certain times of the year, and helping, because they are contracted to many other places on the island as well, that they can help to distribute tourism to different places at different times of the year. And I think that that's a great benefit to us. Around the MRDT, which is also known as the hotel tax, I don't think that we're the only local government that's interested in using that for affordable housing. So I think that's definitely a conversation that will be coming. Maybe the percentage that's collected from the hotels now might be a bit of a fight to, get that away from just marketing. But the additional MRDT that we would hopefully start collecting from vacation rentals could be the type of thing that we can direct toward affordable housing. So still a lot of conversation around that, and I think that there's capacity through Tourism Vancouver Island that we don't have within our own staff. They drew up the MRDT contract for Courtney, and were able to fast track that and have all those discussions with the province, because it was originally held by the CVEDS Society, and so it needed to be moved into the City of Courtney's hands. And so Tourism Vancouver Island was instrumental in helping that happen. And I've talked to Anthony, and he's very willing to help us in the same way, which again is something that we need and is hopefully going to happen shortly. But yeah, I don't have too much reservation about joining the tourism service. It's, I think, roughly a quarter of the cost of what we were paying for the full economic development service when CVEDS was there. So it's obviously it's just focused on tourism, but there's so many benefits and so much leveraging of funds and all those good things, and the technical expertise and all that we could benefit from. Thanks.
On page 49 of the report of our agenda, it talks about small road. It's their mailing address, and they say Courtney, BC. That really needs to change now. Yes, it's in Cumberland.
And you know what? I actually looked the other day, Your Worship. You saw it here. But if you go to the website now for that tourism information
It's
center,
there too.
It's in Cumberland. Last I looked at it, it was Cumberland, Grant Road,
Okay,
Cumberland.
they must
or
have
Small
changed
Road.
it since the last time I looked. But
Send
yeah.
them another note.
Thank you very much. The other items that I'm a little concerned about joining back into the service through the bylaw, because of the what they've got here is it's still the old process of you have to arbitration and negotiation. It's the same process to get out of it, and I have real concerns about that. But being a contract with them, absolutely, I support that. I think they're doing a fabulous job. And I know when we had discussions with the consultant, he recommended that that would be the way for Cumberland to go, not to get tied up in the other. So I would really like to support that. I think that we could down the road, but at this point, as we're just starting back up with them, I think we need to still watch it. And I was really glad to see the cost that it was going to cost us. And I know there's issues about the building and whether we did pay for it for many, many years. And even when we left the service in 2016, we still paid them quite a substantial amount of money for the next 4 years. Mm-hmm. And where they put that money, we don't know. But it probably went towards the mortgage on the building. We have no idea of knowing where it went to, but we did pay for it. So we were actually only out of it for 2 years of funding it. So we should have reaped some benefit from that. The other thing that I'm really quite happy about is that we'd be back involved with the film commission again. We've been out not paying them any money for quite some time because we opted out. And I remember sitting on their board in Campbell River for quite a few years. And I think Councillor Sproul did too.
Yeah, and they've worked very hard to find a way for Cumberland to be connected to the film industry. They're always current.
And the only other question, and I know it will come up in discussion later, is they talk about the admin of the committee that would be formed, and who in Cumberland would sit on that committee. That was a concern that I had, and I know at this point we don't know that.
Yeah, and that's part of the recommendation, asking for staff time to go back and understand and study and get some more information exactly about what joining the service is, because there's lots of administrative things like that. The MRDT, what's our role as a member in the MRDT, and how we can do that, how we can help with the administrative, the committees and stuff that make those decisions, the weighting of community participation in those committees. Are all things that we could talk through the discussions of that service, but staff would like to be able to ask those questions as well and bring it back to council. So you have that information.
Thank you. Each step we take, we get more and more information, so that's positive. That was quite a chore to read through all the information that we were presented, and to keep track of which one was what one was the one that we were working with and which one we were not.
Yeah, and it's interesting. There's a piece, if you looked at the very end, that came with the letter requesting consent to the bylaw, and it's a copy of that service review. It's their service review report. So, for us as staff, as we weren't part of the service and weren't part of the review, that was a really useful piece of information. And it gives you a good idea of what the goal is around MRDT and stuff, and the big picture of the service and stuff. So I was happy to be able to provide that.
Okay. So, Council, what is your pleasure?
Okay. That council authorizes entering into the Regional Tourism Service Agreement with the Comox Valley Regional District for the administration, management, and delivery of regional tourism services in 2022 as attached to this report dated June 30th, 2022. And that council directs staff to respond to the Comox Valley Regional District's request to consent to the adoption of the Comox Valley Regional District Bylaw number 725 and request an extension for the village response to September 30th, 2022, and that council directs staff to bring forward a future report that considers the CVRD's request for the inclusion of Cumberland as a formal participant in the Comox Valley Tourism Service, and that that council direct staff to invite the CVRD to appear as a delegation at a future meeting to present the outcomes of the service review conducted in 2021 and 2022 and provide further detail on their invitation to the village to join the Regional Tourism Service.
Seconder?
Second.
All in favor? Carried.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, that council receive the request for Village of Cumberland's consent to adopt Comox Valley Regional District Regional Parks and Trails Service Establishment Bylaw Report.
Move receipt.
Second.
All in favor? Carried.
All right, good evening. Sorry, just while I queue up the report, I have to wade through all of the previous reports attachments. So another regional district item of business here. So there's lots of information in the report, including an attempt to follow up on the outcomes of the discussion when the background study was presented to council in March. But essentially what's transpired since then is the proposed framework for the service has remained the same as was proposed in the background study completed by Alan Nielsen, the consultant, and informed by the Regional Parks Working Group. The one main difference, which has resulted in some delays, and perhaps Councillor Kettler can speak to any of these, I know she was privy to multiple discussions over the last few weeks, was really just around in voting structure for the committee that would make decisions on behalf of the service. And really what's just resulted of that is the final proposed bylaw, which is in front of you this evening for consent for the village to join the service, would be for any decision related to the acquisition of real property. So the creation of a new park via an acquisition, there would need to be a 3/4 or a 75% voting threshold on the committee. So what we're calling, I think, the super majority, as opposed to the 67% super majority which the committee proposed. And that was a result of some discussions that were brought forward by the Comox directors on the regional board. So otherwise, yeah, the report has lots of background information in response to some of council's previous questions. I'm happy. I don't think that I need to go through all of them, but open to answering any questions that may come up.
Okay, Councillor Kettler.
Yeah, I'm also open to any questions if you have want some more insight into how those discussions went at the board. Yeah, some of the bones of contention were the voting structure, as Kevin explained. The town of Comox had said in their letter that they wanted the ability to veto along with another jurisdiction. And so that's sort of how the 75%, which is the super majority, came up. Then it kind of went back and forth about how that might stall out the process. And so there was talk about it only applying to the actual acquisition, and other functions of the service would be the regular supermajority or 67% voting structure, so that things didn't get stalled out as far as investigation of certain properties and moving things forward to the point right before you would do an acquisition. And so that seemed to be accepted by the directors, there is no maximum requisition on this service, and that was something that came up. They're proposing, I think, $275,000 starting requisition for the region as a whole. Again, I think our portion of that is the $14,000 range. But one of the things that came up around maximum requisition is that if long-term boring is needed, if we were going to have a large acquisition, then the board would need to seek electoral assent anyway from the public. So for the long-term boring. So that would sort of be a check and balance there of going to the public and seeing whether there is approval for long-term boring of a large purchase. So that kind of gave some peace of mind, I guess, to some of us that were concerned about that. And one of the other things that Comox came up with in their letter was that they wanted basically a strategy for how acquisitions would happen, but that isn't possible without actually starting the service, creating the committee, having that committee deliberate with all the information brought to them to sort of figure out that strategy. So it was a little bit cart before the horse, and so we couldn't give them the strategy that they wanted, but instead we sort of tried to give them a list of priorities that the board agreed to. And so that is in the report as well. Parks for greenways and for connecting the different parts of the region was at the top of the list, and that was certainly at the top of Comox's list, and I think that would be at the top of Cumberland's list as well. And yeah, happy to answer any questions that other councillors may have.
Councillor Brown, you have a question? Sorry.
I don't see very well, but I was looking at Jessie. I can't find those pages because I've got too much paper here. But I understood one of the reasons for looking into this Parks Committee was to take the pressure off some of the very popular parks, such as Comox Lake Park. And I don't understand. I mean, it's clear that fresh water means a lot to a lot of people, but I'm not sure how you manage where people go to recreate and how those decisions as to which pieces of land are necessary to get the full picture of what we need in parks. And I don't know if you have any more light.
Yeah, Kevin might want to elaborate, but I think that, the goal is not to take over anybody's current parks service or park operations. And that it would only be new acquisitions, and those acquisitions would follow the strategy that hasn't yet been developed. So, they certainly would have a conservation aspect to them and a recreation aspect, transportation, alternative modes of transportation aspects as well. So I don't know if Kevin wants to expand on that at all.
Yeah, I would just add that it was unanimous concern around the table of the regional park managers that all parks in the valley were seeing pressures due to growth. And so one of the ideas with a regional park service is for a certain kind of typology of a park, be it a large area of land that has regional attributes that are going to attract people from multiple jurisdictions, that the creation of that and the addition of more of those types of parks would help relieve some of the pressures on community parks. So for us, we have a few community parks that have many regional attributes to them. The service wasn't about taking those over, but if there was more freshwater access enabled in the valley, be it, lakes that are currently owned by Mosaic or private lands along major rivers, then that may deter some of the use that's currently going to Lake Park to some other areas. And we thought that could be a major benefit to such a service, especially in such a high growth area of the province like the Comox Valley is.
I just want to make one more note on that. Sorry, I always do this. It's just that we have lots of parks that we, the people, have paid for. I mean, informally outside of the taxing system. And I have a hard time, it sounds kind of mean and tight-fisted, but we have all these wonderful parks, and I don't want to share them with people, but as far as the ownership of them, but you've assured, I understand there's no intention to take them over. But still, we have created many parks, and it's all going to, so that, I don't know what to say. Is there a limit? I don't think so, because we have so many, but I do feel quite possessive about Cumberland's parks that we've fundraised for. What's the
Well, and I think the region has contributed to the acquisition of some of those under our water service, so as a conservation measure, because we are sharing this watershed, and so the water service of the region has interest in helping to conserve lands around and feeding into Comox Lake. So that service will continue, and those partnerships will continue in that service, apart from this regional park service.
Right.
If I can just add, I think there are many, many people who have also, from other regions in the valley, who have also donated to CCFS and helped purchase those, and they're already coming. They're already here.
It's true.
Okay.
And if I can just add, I do want to emphasize that the conversation really has been about acquiring new areas and new greenways to connect communities, and never has it been about converting existing community parks to regional parks. Now, the acquisition or the strategic plan and acquisition strategy, could it consider the conversion of a large area like Seal Bay or something? It could. Hypothetically, that's possible, but I don't think the Cumberland Community Forest Lake Park are at risk of being even part of that conversation. That would require council direction to even consider those conversations.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Councillor Brown.
I didn't have anything. The only thing that is still of interest to me is the separation of operational and acquisition. But I think what I'm understanding here is that will happen through the committee, through the strategic planning and all of that.
That would be, the committee could choose to do that.
Okay.
And have these two separate funding for, as you say, operations and acquisition. Inevitably, at this point, there needed to be some kind of line in the sand where you just establish a service and then some of these more specific matters get worked out once it's established and the committee can start. Like in the early days, without any parks, there's not going to be any operating, so it's going to be very much focused on planning and then acquisition. And so establishing that didn't necessarily make immediate sense, but yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I have a few questions. One, to me, my high priority is the greenways because the cost of the land, and I'm sure the connections that we want to make, that land is more able, probably more likely to be sold off in smaller chunks. So I hope that they really look at the connections that we want to make for the greenways. The other one is, will they be applying to foundations for grants? It's not all going to come out of the taxpayers, I hope. Because because everybody's working together, I think there's lots of opportunity to apply to other foundations for grants to support these.
Yeah, so in the service establishment bylaw, it does mention as a funding, potential funding source would be grants or donations or other partnerships. And I think as Cumberland's experience has been, that's been hugely successful in the ability to emulate that elsewhere in the valley, especially with some of these local conservation leadership groups that really, to Councillor Brown's point, really do have a regional audience to them. And if I can just comment quickly on the greenways, what I find fascinating is I started having these conversations probably the better part of 5 or 6 years ago, and it was actually on greenways to start, recognizing the challenges of our current kind of approach to regional transportation, having some sort of service that enable better connectivity. And as those conversations evolved, it was, well, if we're going to look at this, what about a regional parks? But I think your comment is reflected around the valley, and that is a priority for many of the other parties as well.
Good,
Yeah.
thank you. One more question. When the consultant was here, I asked about the board members and if they were going to be paid for sitting on these committees. So is there a committee formation, or, as I assume there will be, you will be part of the process of sitting on committees at the regional district for discussions?
I'm not. Well, so anything that's decided by the committee actually goes back to the board, like all the other committee resolutions come back to the main board. So I will certainly be there, if that's the will of council, to vote on that. But I don't know what the composition of the Regional Parks Committee would be at this point.
Okay, because I asked if they were going to be volunteers or if they're going to be paid, because would we be expected to pay those fees, and is that included in here, or would that come under administration?
I'm not sure. I think they would be paid per meeting as all our other committees. I don't know if there's a different.
So that would come out of it wouldn't come out of this money, we would be charged administration fees to the RD?
I don't know the answer to that. No.
I might just want to speak a little bit. It does say initial requisition of 275, and they wouldn't, unless they come back at financial planning time and up that requisition, that would include everything. Like, they wouldn't say 275 and then there would be extra costs. But at financial planning time, they could come and say, well, we have these extra administration costs that hadn't been taken into account. They need to be added. But that would be at financial planning time, and the board would see that.
Okay, thank you.
I just have one more thing.
Yes?
Talking about greenways, I think of linear parkways, much like the Kettle Valley Railway. We have our very own Wellington Colliery Railway, much of it in the public realm through the CVRD. And I mean, really, most of that's there. And then there's the One Spot Trail. There are many old industrial trails that can easily be strung together. The Wellington Colliery Railroad's pretty much ready to, I mean, it's still dirt, but it's mapped, and if anybody wants to see in the planning department, and I think I gave a copy to Leslie, I joined the whole maps together so you can see it's all there, right from lake to shining sea. Anyway. that's
Thank
my
you very
comment.
much. Okay, what is your pleasure?
Go for it. No, okay. That the Village of Cumberland consent to the adoption of the Comox Valley Regional District Bylaw number 719 being Regional Parks and Trails Service Establishment Bylaw number 719, 2022 under section 346 of the Local Government Act.
Seconder?
Oh, sorry.
All in favor? Carried. Next, that council receive the 2021 annual report and receive any submissions and questions from the public.
Receipt.
Second.
All in favor?
I can confirm that we have not received any submissions from the public on the annual report.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Moving along, that someone like to make the motion?
Oh, sorry, that council received the 2021 annual report and receive, oh, yeah, no,
And-
that's it. The submissions and questions from the public.
Second.
Did we vote on that?
No.
Seconder?
No.
All in favor? Carried. Okay. Okay, that council received the 2021 Statement of Financial Information, Sophie Report.
Receipt.
Second.
All in favor? Carried.
Me.
Okay, good evening, Mayor and Council. In front of you is a report that is an annual report that you would be required to approve for filing with the ministry each year. And it is, it just outlines the different remuneration and expenses that you pay to your staff and council, and also vendor payments as well, and your community grants are in there. It also includes your audited financial statements. You may have noticed it's usually supposed to be with the ministry by June 30th, so we're a little bit late this year, but I don't suspect that there'll be any consequence to that. So there we go. And I can answer any questions. Thanks.
Anyone have any questions?
I do, I'm just trying to find it.
Okay, we'll have to move along.
Oh, there it is. Okay, so in the segment disclosure with budget information on page 212, there's under expenses, there's a goods and service line, and the actual was $233,000 and change, but the budget was a negative 128,000 and change, and I'm just curious what happened there.
Yeah. Okay, well, first of all, I'll explain the budget of negative 128,000. So that's, that you'll see that pretty much every year. So what happens in general government is I take all of the admin charges, like manager of operations charges and those types of things, all of IT, all of finance, anything that's administrative, and I allocate a portion of that out to water and sewer and storm. And then that way your utilities are fully funded, because otherwise our costs should be funded through utility fees that relate to that instead of property tax. So that's your negative budget, and that's every year you see. Now, normally then, of course, your actuals would be a negative too. And you might notice, like, if you look in your segment disclosure that compares year over year, 2020 was a negative actual. So what happens with your audited financial statements is the audit. The regulations require the audit to audit based on your original budget, not your amended budget. So normally that would have been a negative actual number and against a negative, but you had like about 370,000 or 60 something thousand dollars in COVID funds used in this department for various big, huge initiatives. And so that's not showing in the budget because it's the original budget. It's not amended, but it is showing in the actuals. So it goes from a negative amount to a positive amount because it's quite a large hit.
It was.
And you normally wouldn't see that, but this year you did because of those funds.
Okay, awesome. And I do have one more question, and that is around the financing of the fire hall debt. I think it's on page 210.
Is it your Schedule 2?
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
Your Schedule 2.
So I'm just wondering, because that interest rate is nice, and it says that it's due 2041, so are we locked in? That can't be possible. No.
It's not possible.
Okay, well, it's worth a try.
It's locked in because MFA was really struggling, like getting these low rates and everything. They actually, normally they lock it in for 10 years and you refinance after 10, but these lower ones, they only got 5 years on them. So after, I think it's 2024, I think it might be, or something, it's going to change. But we do have that showing in the financial plan.
Okay.
It's in there.
Thank you.
Okay, so someone like to move?
I'll move that council approve the Corporation of Village of Cumberland 2021 Statement of Financial Information for filing with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, Local Government Infrastructure and Finance Branch.
Second.
All in favor? Carried. Next, recommend that council receive the anti-racism report from Councillor Vicky Brown.
Receipt.
Seconder? All in favor? Carried.
So thank you. This is, council might remember the presentation by Lindstone and Company, if I'm saying that right, at AVICC about this anti-racial discrimination policy. So they have handily created a legal document template for us to follow. And I wanted to bring it forward because we are still, unfortunately, having racist incidents happening in this village on an ongoing basis, and that's really sad. and I think that leadership comes from the top, and so we need to model anti-racist behavior in our village organizations and committees and in our the work we do, and I think this will help move us forward on that and provide an opportunity for conversation around it within the village and also within the larger community that hopefully helps shift some behavior. So it is there for you. I'm not sure I can answer any questions about it because it's, not my.
No, you did the right process because the accessibility cannot deal with it unless council asks them to deal with it. Okay, so any further comments? So it's to refer to the committee, Accessibility and Inclusion Committee, for feedback.
I'll move that.
Thank you very much. Yes?
Second.
Could I just ask, in Councillor Brown's report, there is a motion to also request staff to review the policy and bring back a policy recommendation for council?
That's done through the Accessibility Committee, would it not?
So I thought we maybe should take it to accessibility, get those comments, and then bring it back and council can
Back to council?
do the,
Okay.
yeah?
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
And you seconded that, Councillor Kittler? Okay, all in favor? Carried. Okay, Mayor's And councillors' monthly reports. Once again, it started out to be a slow month. Didn't end that way. On the 13th, I had a meeting with Minister Adrian Dix, the Minister of Health, and he asked for a tour of the Cumberland Medical Clinic. So I walked him through the medical clinic and told him about the nonprofit society that has been set up and that they're working towards opening the clinic up. And it was a very good meeting. He spent about half an hour here touring and talking about the facility. And of course, he wouldn't make a commitment. He has to take it back to the ministry. But the committee themselves, the nonprofit, the Cumberland Beaufort Society, Family Health, and they are working, we meet weekly about moving this forward. They have actually had a request from the ministry to submit an application to fund the services that they would like to have in the clinic. So that's in the works. I attended the yearly airport meeting, and it was really interesting, and I would like to ask Mike Atkins, the CAO, to come and give a presentation to Cumberland Council. He talked about climate change and what they as an airport are doing to mitigate that and what they're trying to make happen. He did comment that smaller airports are moving faster than the larger airports in making changes. They're looking at removing natural gas from their facility. They're looking at using electric vehicles for transportation and power. They've got all kinds of things that they're working on. He also said that they're at 70% of pre-COVID in flights, and they now have Flare and Swoop flying out of Comox. And those are really cheap flights, I am told. I haven't had that opportunity to fly anywhere. So it was really interesting to listen to him. So I think you'd be all interested in hearing what they're doing. We had an elected officials emergency operations center tabletop exercise, and Councillor Sullivan joined Michelle and Kevin. And we had a great afternoon learning about what would happen if there was an earthquake at Mount Washington, if I'm not mistaken, and what would happen and what we would be responsible for. And it was a really quick learning experience for some. Michelle Mason and myself attended a tour of the Cumberland Health Center, and we had actually had to be tested before we were allowed to go into the center for COVID, and we were quite excited that we passed the test. And it's not like it used to be, I'll tell you, it's changed. It's a lot easier. And we had to wait the 15 minutes, but we had a tour of the facility, and it was great because the changes that they have made inside, the renal dialysis now got 12 chairs. And if you are a Canadian citizen and you're getting renal dialysis, say in Montreal, you can make an appointment here if you're here on holidays and go and have it done here. So it gives people the opportunity to travel that have that need. And so we had a great tour and update on what's going on in the facility. It's a great place. The staff is amazing. They work really hard to keep everybody in the lodge safe. Next, that one, no. I had a meeting in Courtenay Council Chambers on the Ukrainians that are moving into the community, and this was providers and caregivers and people that are sponsoring families, and it was a real eye-opener to what some of them are going through. For an immigrant to get updated and to speak English, there's a 2-year waiting list for them to improve their language, and that is very that's not good to be waiting that long, because there's roadblocks to getting a good job. Some of them are professionals, high professionals, and they cannot work here because they don't have the language. So they're looking at opportunities to change that. And of course, Miners Memorial was very successful, attended by a lot of people, and Councillor Sproul didn't know you could sing.
I actually got up on the stage and sang some coal miner
Yes.
union songs.
Yes, it was.
I
It
hadn't
was
decided on it beforehand. It was spontaneous. But
Yeah, it was a fun evening. I had a meeting with John McGowan from BC Housing, and Courtney Simpson, our planner, came to the meeting, and it was updates on all the BC Housing projects and potential projects that could happen in the village. I also have set up a meeting for the end of this month for the Cumberland Senior Citizens Housing Society that would like to expand. Went to the 19-wing commander change, and it was a very nice ceremony and very windy, but it was nice to meet the new commander. And I attended a meeting, and it was called the Annual Municipal Leaders Forum with Mayor of Calgary and the Mayor of Barrie, Ontario. And these are fairly large cities, but during the meeting, it was so interesting because they were talking about things that really affect all of us, and they were coming up with some solutions. And they talked about, as a community, we should be doing master plans for toxic drugs, mental health, and affordable housing, that we should have master plans for all them, the same as we do for our parks, our cemeteries, and our infrastructure. And they said the federal government is good at giving money, BC government is good at giving orders, but we are on the ground taking the downloads. We're taking, people want us to solve the issues, and this is one way where we can get the issues up front and center and be actively working on them. So, and then I was invited by Chair Kettler of the Regional District to attend the Island Health Board of Directors Partnership event in Campbell River, and it was a very nice event. We got to tour the facility, and it was an amazing facility. We're lucky to have one so close. And it was for pregnant women that are in stress and have issues with their pregnancy. And it was a beautiful facility. And I think you have something to say about that later. But it was nice to see a lot of the people still involved in healthcare and to spend the afternoon with them. And that's my report, if anybody has any questions. Next, Councillor Kettler.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, and just to, I certainly support what you're speaking to in regard to coming up with plans for some of the social issues that are being downloaded onto local government. I think that's a great idea, and a way to also, call the province to task on some of these things. So thanks for that suggestion. Yeah, a lot of what was talked about at the regional district we talked about tonight, such as the regional parks service. One of the other things I wanted to highlight was, as Cumberland's representative to the regional board, I did give permission to authorize the execution of the next generation 9/11 local government service agreement. And that's basically, they're kind of switching from an analog to a digital system. And TELUS needed agreement that this data that would, just for the 9/11 service, that would include text and sometimes photos to update the service, that we give permission for them to use that information and to make that switch to digital service. So yeah, that's one of the things that happened. Yeah, Miners Memorial was great. And just wanted to thank Comox First Nation for hosting the public at their big house for National Indigenous Peoples Day. Thanks. Any
Thank you.
questions? I'm happy to answer.
Councillor Brown?
What's different here? Climate Leadership Institute. So I went and stayed in a hostel at UBC. Don't do that. It was very affordable, but it was not super comfortable because I'm not 20 anymore. But it was really great. There was a small group of us, but all super keeners on climate work. So that was really great. And going through the different funding options that the province and the federal government have out there for us was super useful. And what else? The farmers market opening, I forgot to put on there, but it was great. They did it in a good way with the Comox First Nation there, which was lovely. And it's now open every Sunday from 10 till 1. And I think that's it. Unless anybody has questions.
Councillor Sproul?
Yes, it was a lively month socially. Obviously, clearly people have been dying to get out there and go to the garden tour, which was superb, especially as there was a lot of music up little alleyways off the back of Camp Road. Who knew? I didn't used to be able to go down Camp Road, but and if you go up each path, there'll be music at the end. But anyway, it was beautiful. And then the Miners' Memorial was, I thought it was still a good turnout, a little bit less than usual, but yeah, it's
Oh,
a good time.
Yeah, and I understand you were in the garden tour, home and garden
yes.
tour.
Yeah, you've done that before too, haven't you?
3 years in a row, but
Oh my goodness.
but this year I couldn't do it because my granddaughter was graduating in Nanaimo from
Oh,
university
right, yeah.
that day, so I couldn't miss that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a lot of work.
it's a tremendous amount of work. The people don't realize that.
Yeah, and apparently it's like having a baby and you just forget how hard it is and then you do it again.
Yes.
So I see that you've done that and it's possible that I will do that again once I'm done recovering.
Yes, yeah. My husband enjoyed it more than anything because he loved the people talking about the house,
Yes.
the history. Okay, and I think I forgot to ask to receive the mayor and councillors' monthly reports.
I move receipt.
Second.
All in favor? Carried. Next, bylaws.
That council adopt the development cost charge reserve expenditure bylaw number 1172, 2022.
Yes. All in favor? Carried. No new business. Notice, motions, and announcements. July 14th and 21st, Advisory Planning Commission, and July 20th, Homelessness and Affordable Housing Committee meetings. Question period. Please notify us at info@cumberland.ca using subject line question period for any questions pertaining to the agenda.
We do have some questions.
Yes?
Mayor Baird. The first question's regarding the tourism service report. How much did Cumberland have to pay to be released from the service agreement for economic and tourism in the past?
$40,000 was it? We paid a year for how many years? 4?
Yeah,
4 years.
40,000 each year for 4 years,
I haven't forgotten
160 in
it.
total.
Yes.
And will Cumberland still receive property taxes for the information center if the village is part of the service agreement?
They currently do not receive property taxes for that facility with or without belonging to the service because it is no longer owned. It is owned by the CVRD, and we don't. They're non-taxable.
Yes.
Okay, we have some questions about the streamlining accessory dwelling units report. And the question, why remove the stormwater management reports? Is the information not valuable?
That might sound like why we would not do the development permit guideline for stormwater and because you can't put that into the zoning bylaw. And would they not be valuable, or is that,
Is it not valuable information that's needed, I
Yeah.
suppose? Yeah.
so does that help?
Yeah, we don't, why, is there anything else that we could do? Because it is valuable information. They must feel that it's not warranted?
Well,
Or
wouldn't the property have a stormwater management plan for the whole property? Like,
if it's an old house, no.
oh, right.
And then I believe something that was said in the presentation was that there are some zones that have ADUs in them, and they don't require a DP, so then they didn't need those. So and there was no real problem with those. I'm thinking that it would probably be part of the guidelines brochure as well, to talk about.
I found on page 40 of the agenda, in the staff report, it says a stormwater management plan would no longer be required for an ADU. ADUs would be required to connect to the municipal stormwater system where available.
Okay.
That's helpful. A second question, how many staff hours are currently being spent on processing development permits? Will not requiring a development permit allow the village to decrease its staff?
No, it won't be allowed to decrease our staff because of the workload that they're doing right now. Yeah, but how many hours does that? Oh, that would be hard to. I'm sure we can come back with a figure, because I don't think we know off the top of our head. No.
Are we trying to speed up the development process for all of Cumberland?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't think so. What comes to the top of the list all the time is the affordable housing component to it, and because there's our staff does a lot more work than approving development, and the time commitment for doing each development application is tremendous. And I think that would be a good idea, to have a rough idea of how much time they actually spend on each of the applications, because I know for a subdivision it would be a tremendous amount of hours.
And I can just speak a little bit more. I'm not sure the word speed up is really what's going on with this modernization project. It's really finding efficiencies and not duplicating work between council and the staff. Just finding better processes so that the staff can just do their job better.
A lot of our processes are very old, and we're trying to get modernized.
Okay, no
Okay.
more questions.
Okay. So motion for, let's go in camera, please.
So moved.
Seconder,
Second.
all in favor? Carried. Thank you very much.